of art and corporations is really an interesting one, and we should probably discuss it for just a few moments. But to set the table like we already did with the idea that, this well-connected elite family's museum owns this artist's controversial work, it kind of reminds me, too, as we'll see films and shows and things that come out and seem to sort of pull the curtain back on things, and you want to think, oh, wow, Warner Brothers or Miramax or Epitaph Records or whatever it is, boy, they're really, how did they get away with this? They're really, sticking it to the man showing this kind of information. It's an amazing kind of control over most art, and it's almost a kind of bragging.
Well, I mean, first off, culture is a collection of human expression. And the environment we find ourselves in today is devoid of human expression. All you have around you is corporate expression. Corporate produced programs, movies, magazines, everything's out there for profit, made by somebody who doesn't even own the company. They're just working there because they're shareholders and, yada, yada, yada. At the end of the day, human expression and art are the solutions to the apathy and the ignorance that we've been practicing over the past several years. We have a wake-up call. We have a chance to use our energy and focus it creatively and try to get more human culture out there so we can communicate with each other and, kind of get on the same page and survive. To your other point, there's an excellent film, although it's sharp, it's got a sharp edge in all the wrong ways, is called The American Ruling Class. And basically this character who used to, his family is from the elite, wealthy family. His family is in politics. He was in charge of Harper's Magazine for years. And he gets this whole movie together where he has these two guys basically from, Yale and Ivy League schools go around and try to find out, is there an American ruling class? He's got interviews with James Baker and all these characters in there, the people that run New York Times, people that run other established authorities, Council on Foreign Relations. All of these things are in there. They're factual. You see the people who run them. They're in the film. They're playing along. They're letting you know because they're letting you know on their pace, on their scale, and at the rate that they're comfortable with, which is exactly what they want. So you've got this great tool called the American Ruling Class. You can show that movie to other people who will not believe that there is something credible to what's going on. I mean, I got another book over here called Superclass by David Rothkopf. He's a member of Council on Foreign Relations. What we have to realize in this country is that from the beginning of the 20th century, at the very least, our educations were being adversely influenced. You could say that these educational institutions, these ruling foundations, had a gravity-like effect because they were basically controlling all the content. They took out historians who told the history that they didn't like. They created and taught and trained and vetted historians who told the stories they wanted to tell. Everything that we were taught in school has been manipulated, and that's on congressional record. That comes from somebody who is an insider. It comes from the director of research for the Reese Committee, which went on in the 50s, to study what is the influence of these global foundations, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Guggenheim Foundation, the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And basically, as Norman Dowd recounts in a 1981 interview that he had with G. Edward Griffin, he states that the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace opened up their records, their minutes of their meetings. And so, wanting to send somebody objective, Norman Dowd has this attorney who Congress agrees with, and this woman says, there's no conspiracy. I could never picture that these establishments, these foundations could ever do anything bad. Then she goes and checks out their records. She reads their records spot reads through like 50 years of records, and she comes back and she has basically the gist of it. These people are there to subvert your education, your family, everything that you know to be America is something that they think they control and that they can manipulate and they can steal from and they can trick you about your life. And when Norman Dowd lays this out, Norman went to Andover. He's from Yale. He worked for J.P. Morgan. He discovered the fraud. He kind of became a whistleblower. And then he went to work for Congress as a director of research for the Reese Committee. Now, there's very few books out there that even talk about the Reese Committee because of what it found out. And when you show this information to other people, credible people, learned people, people with PhDs after their name, they have to stop and consider it because it wasn't handed to them by their educational system, and it exists, and it's very much real.
Did so much of this get its start with what's referred to as the Tavistock Institute? Can we mention the Tavistock Institute? Because even when I was in college, doing media studies. We also went over a guy named Edward Bernays, and he's, and it was on the test that Edward Bernays is the father of modern public relations.
Yeah, totally. Bernays and this other character named Lippmann, basically as a function of Cecil Rhodes' Last Will and Testament. And this is in a book. It's a 1902 book called The Last Will and Testament of Cecil John Rhodes, with elucidatory notes by William T. Stead. And William T. Stead was the executor of Cecil Rhodes' will and was in charge of creating the roundtable groups and these secret societies and the Rhodes scholarships and whatnot. So it's a credible book. I'm going to send you the link after this interview, and you can also look it up on worldcat.com, which will search your local library. But it's usually at a nearby law library, as I found out, for good reason. Tavistock Institute, let me just read you a little foreword out of the book by Dr. James Coleman. It says, or rather it reads, "The Tavistock Institute of Human Relations was unknown to the people of the United States before I exposed its existence in my 1969 monograph, The Tavistock Institute of Human Relations, Britain's Control of the United States. Up to that time, Tavistock had successfully retained its secretive role in shaping the affairs of the United States, its government, and its people since its early beginning in London in 1913 at Wellington House." So, it goes on to say, Tavistock began as a propaganda creating and disseminating organization centered at Wellington House, where the original organization was put together, with the intent of shaping a propaganda center that would break down a stiff public resistance being encountered to the looming war between Britain and Germany. And so basically what these characters got together and did was, they said, look, they contrived this World War I. They're doing all this crazy financing. They're creating the Federal Reserve around the same time. And then afterwards they said, look, the lies that the war economy has brought us and all the profits and everything that we've gotten because of this, we don't want to give it up. So we have to keep people in the mind that they're always at war, and we have to keep them in the war economy, and we have to build up militaries all over the place, because then we can put them against each other, because the bankers really make money from funding wars and the destruction of the wars. And when they loan people in countries money for war, a lot of times that money can't be paid back, because you can only pay it back with the money that you're being loaned, which is being loaned at interest, which is a recurring loop, which would drive anybody nuts, let alone the people trying to pay compound interest over hundreds of years. But I digress.
But it's well documented that generally throughout most wars, both sides, both enemies, are being funded by essentially these same families and establishments and foundations that we've just spoken about, and ultimately they fund both sides until they decide we're going to throw a little bit extra money behind these guys. These guys are going to win.
Now, I saw a film a couple days ago, and I was in disbelief the whole time I watched it. It's a film produced in 1934 by 20th Century Pictures, before they were 20th Century Fox, in association with United Artists, and the movie was nominated for an Academy Award. It's called The House of Rothschild. It's on YouTube. You can watch it in 12 parts, and it's their propagandized history of their own doings. And even at that, they tell the story much better than any one of us could ever retell their story. I mean, it truly is priceless, and they give it a human angle, because Nathan and his wife, they have such a love story, and before Nathan goes out and fucks everybody, she always gives him a flower to put on his lapel. So there's this love interest, and they're just a banking family who is being persecuted, and for even them telling their own story, I just found it incredible how today learned or so-called learned people will deny with every ounce of their being that these bankers control not only our government, but our militaries, our the wars, and that the military is being used to soften the ground to bring in corporations, a la Smedley Butler in his 1934 book, War is a Racket, where he said the only effective way to smash war is to take the profits out of it.
And I believe we could say the same thing about the drug war or any other war on blank.
Well, the only war that has ever existed is the war on consciousness. It's always been a war of people who have more information, a better perspective, a higher perspective, however you want to see it. They have their box is bigger, right? Maybe they have no walls to their box. Maybe they have no limits. Maybe they believe in no God. I'm not sure, but it's always been people who get a hand up, and instead of lending that hand and trying to help people cooperatively, they always try to wiggle some profit out of it, or use it to control and subvert your free will. And so I think where the Darwinists and the evolutionists are wrong is that it's not survival of the fittest and mastering by the most ruthless. It's survival through cooperation